please just identify yourself. Two people in the audience.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dolores Jones Brown, and I'm a professor in the Department of Law and Police Science, and I run our Center on Race, Crime, and Justice. I want to thank you so much for the talk today and for having done the book. It's a piece of history that I think it is so important for people of all ages to know and to understand. But there are two sort of very profound points that you made, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot because at my age, it's like, why are we still having to go back over these kinds of things? And part of the Bridging the Divide initiative is to talk about ways in which we can change things. So the first one is in terms of how publishing companies respond to work by Black writers and about Black people. I'm an academic, I'm a publisher parish kind of career person, and I've heard far too many stories from Black and Latino academics that when they have first put their work out to be entertained by a publishing company, things are said like, Black people don't read, so that's why we're not interested in your manuscript. No one's going to buy this book. And a book that went on to be a very award-winning book by a Latino academic, he was told that, oh, this is just trash, nobody's going to read this. So, and I'll put them both questions out, and then maybe you can answer them both, right? So how do we move beyond that kind of experience, given all this important work that you've done? And the other one is, and I hate to put it this way, but sort of how do we keep Black and Latino professionals from selling out? The point that you made about Mr. Battle testifying in a way that was supportive of the department, not necessarily because he believed in what he was saying, but because of the opportunities for career advancement that he saw from testifying in that way. How do we help people be true to who they are and still be able to advance in their career?
Okay. I will maybe do better on some of this than others. The publishing industry is a very difficult industry, and speaking personally, it was not easy to find a publisher for this book. I don't know what factor race played in this, and I don't know what factor it being New York-centric played in the difficulty of finding a publisher, but it was there. What happened to the Langston Hughes manuscript is as I said, it happened all over the place. Today they do publish more biographies and autobiographies of African Americans. But they're, of course, they tend to be celebrity-oriented kind of things. And you have the same phenomenon there, I believe, as you have with the Academy Awards. There is a presumption that books by or about minorities will have a limited audience. And I have no idea what marketing information shows, but I am confident that whatever it shows, there are presumptions being made that publishing houses refuse to test. And I also believe that when I've heard numerous people say this, that Blacks don't read, kind of thing. And I do believe that there has to be a racial kind of assumption being made about, because of the color of the skin, the interest, it's just not human readers. It just gets down to something that simple and disgraceful. Now, as far as the, the people not selling out, I've never been put in that position because I'm not black. I've never had to face, a decision that said, will I be true to myself or to a cause that I want, and had to do something that I had to swallow hard to do something. I don't know. I've never been in that circumstance, but I'm quite sure that, many African Americans are. There's probably a much more subtle thing that takes place too, I would imagine. Take big law firms. They say they recruit, they'll look all over the place because they feel they need numbers anyway. And I think there's enormous pressures on the young black lawyers who go into big firms because the firms themselves, I think, are doing it they're doing it because they believe they have to do it, and it creates tensions. And I am quite sure that many African American lawyers, in those firms feel the pressure that, they really better be better than anybody else or it's not going to work out for them. And I think there's going to be some truth to that, I believe. So I've never been in the circumstance. So, that's the best I can offer.
Thank you for being here. I started to read the book and had really... Oh, my name's Jose. I'm a student here. I started to read the book so I could be prepared, but school got in the way a little bit. But I briefed myself a little bit.
I don't accept that as an excuse. School never got in my way for anything.
But two questions. Who were the most important mentors in Battle's life that made the most significant impact besides the obvious, probably immediate family, and books? He was well read. What books did you discover that really influenced him deeply?
Okay, so this answer will link up. When you heard me mention his father, and his father was really important to him, and his faith was really important to him. He returned to it time and time again. He, as a young man, when he came to New York, he had been only an 8th grade education. And, you're not going very far with that, particularly as a young black teenager. And it just happened. This is another Forrest Gump episode in his life. He takes an apartment not far from here. It was near Columbus Circle. That was the center of where African American life was at one point here in New York City, near where the Time Warner building is. And he takes an apartment, and the landlord is friends with Arthur Schomburg. So the landlord invites Battle to come and play cards, whist, teaches him how to play whist with Arthur Schomburg. And in getting to know Arthur Schomburg tells him, if you want to get anywhere, you really got to start to read. You got to learn. So he tells Battle, read everything, and Battle says he was very much benefited by his, his card games with Arthur Schomburg. So what did he read? When he was at Grand Central, celebrities used to come through Grand Central. Enrico Caruso, the opera singer, a man named Richard Harding Davis, who was the glamorous, swashbuckling war correspondent of the time. Opera singers. What he would do is he would read books by Richard Harding Davis, so he could talk to Richard Harding Davis and get to know him. He would read books about the celebrities, so he could get to know them. He wanted tips, but he also wanted to develop, he had a way of networking. He wanted to develop relationships with them so that he could, now what books were his most favorite through life? Anything by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I would never have guessed this in a million years. If you asked me, who is his favorite author? Time and again, he came back and said, Hawthorne. I love Hawthorne. And it may be in the book. There may be pictures. I forget which are in there. Of his library. I mean, he's got thousands of books in his house, in that townhouse. And the newspapers reported that he had read the entire rise and fall of the Roman Empire. They were quite taken by that, and they quizzed him on it, and they said he seems to know the entire thing. So that's an enormous undertaking. So that, it's that's who he was when he did. Anybody else?
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Kosiva. I'm an international student and also a police officer, but in Europe. So my question is, can you tell us something about the current situation, racism situation at the NYPD? For example, I read an article that was published last year, also from the New York Daily News, and it's about a former Black NYPD highway cop who says that there's still a lot of racism going on in the NYPD. Can you tell us a little bit more, or do you know more about?
Well, racism is a difficult thing to measure. It's difficult to know, is it going up, is it going down, right? And you can look at it a number of different ways. There's the station house, which is the working environment. And it's undoubted to me that in some station houses, there's ethnic or racial conflict. There's also interpersonal conflict that has nothing to do with race. So, it's a little bit of a laboratory there. There are for the police officers now, there is a lot of tension, I believe, in how you go about enforcing the law. And many may believe that the directives may not be the right ones, in terms of racial policy and, the balance between enforcement, tough enforcement, and not do, where it's necessary to enforce, it's great. When it's not necessary, you're causing harm that you don't need to cause. So they may, there may be issues that way for them. Now, if you look at the representation of African Americans on the police force through history in New York City. So when Battle gets onto the force in 1911, the representation is 0. The proportion of the New York City population that is African American is about 2%. So there's a gap, right? 0, 2%. After he comes on to the force, the numbers of African Americans joining the force, they rise very, very slowly. For a whole number of years, it's 2 a year, 4 a year, 3, 5. It takes a good amount of time for the pace to build up, okay? And it's, the department begins to recognize after some of the rioting that, maybe we ought to be, having more blacks. But I tracked, and I don't have all the numbers right at hand here, and it'll be, you don't need all the details. I tracked the representation of blacks on the force as I could find it. It's not easy to find it. In different newspaper accounts or different official reports, it's very sporadically reported back. You go back to the 20s, 30s, the 40s. They didn't count things that way. But never in the history of New York City has the black representation on the police force proportionally come close to equaling the proportion of blacks in the New York City population. So now we're talking more than a century from the first getting on to now. That tells you that there is a really significant chasm between a big population of New York City and its police department. That there is this, it's this thing where people are, African American men and women, I believe, are not rushing to join the police department in the same way, clearly, that they're not joining the correction department, right? And I think, people make their own choices. If I had a choice, so I'm going to be a cop or a correction officer, I'm going to pick being a cop. But, so there is this social chasm that they've yet to figure out how to get over, and they have made progress. There's no question they made progress. But, there's still like a 10 percentage point gap. And the last class, it got worse. Right? Now that may be a result of stop and frisk. It may be a result of, the tensions now that people are less willing to, to choose it as a career. But Bratton says that he's going to do better. He's going to. Now, it's going to take, I believe, an enormous recruiting effort to make that happen and to, to draw people in. We'll see. We'll see how successful he is.
It's a challenging issue for which there's no easy answer. In the case of Eric Garner, Staten Island, the sergeant on the scene was a black woman. In the case of the gentleman who was shot in South Carolina in the back, one of the responders was a black police officer who made no attempt to help him until some time had passed. We're seeing in Chicago the same phenomena. So what it forces us to think about is when we say black whatever, what kind of blackness are we? Okay, John Jay is 25-30% black and around 35-40% Latino. Where are they? They're not here. Okay, so every generation has its own struggle, and our struggle now is to understand, well, who do we want to be police officers and what qualities they should bring. And we shouldn't just assume that because they're white or they're black that they bring those necessary qualities. And others will argue, and I'm wearing a professorial hat, that some police departments don't really want black or white folks who speak out. They want people it's a job, it's overtime. And what's troubling to me is when you read the newspapers and you hear just how divided the city is, it's like we live in two different psychological spaces. Because I've been trying to follow this story of the postal worker and the police, and there are people writing in the New York Times saying that they didn't know that these things went on. And I'm like, where have you been, if only for the last 2 or 3 years? In other words, it's now that they're seeing the videotape, and all that tells me is that's some serious denial, that you just don't want to hear these things. And I remember many, many years ago, there was some police shooting, and they interviewed a white woman, and she said, I cannot afford to think that the police would do something like that. Because you imagine the amount of head shifting you would do. So I'm looking at this video over the weekend of these police officers, and I'm like, people are filming them, and nobody says, hold a second, stop. I don't understand that headset. And I'm not saying this is necessarily just a white thing. There's something about policing that just passes all understanding, as the Bible says.
You know, when Eleanor Roosevelt began pressing Fiorello LaGuardia to hire more black police officers, LaGuardia, of course, pointed to battle, but she said, no, you really need more. And he said, well, look, the black cops are the roughest of all, right? It was after the riots, and she was saying, you need black police officers so they won't be so brutal. And he said, no, the black cops are the toughest of all. That may be true. I don't know what the circumstance, was. One of the things that I find kind of amazing in what you're referring to, there is the videotape thing, and they seem, maybe body cameras won't make any difference, but think of this. If you wind the clock back 20 years to what people call the bad old days, when you've got 2,200 murders a year, the crack wars are going on, car theft, there's 100,000 cars being stolen every year, there's 100,000 street muggings every year, and New York is living, justifiably in fear. And some percentage of the crime was committed by young African Americans. Now, at that point, you can kind of get into a police officer's head saying, I'm going to work, and there's going to be 5 murders today, and if I'm in a tough precinct, there's going to be maybe 3 murders in this precinct. There's shootings all over the place, and so they're on edge. They're afraid. It's a difficult circumstance to go to work in. And it develops animosity, right? There's us, there's them. Now you come to today. We're down to 300 murders. And many of them are, some number of them are domestic disputes. They're not, things that are happening out on the street. A whole percentage of them are among gangs, but those are limited to certain neighborhoods. So you begin to think, what is it? Fear is not an excuse anymore. You can't hold that up and say, look, they're afraid, so they're defending themselves all the time. That's why they take out their gun. It's not a factor. Why did Peter Liang have his gun out? There was no immediate threat. You can say, yeah, okay, the pink houses have more crime than other places, but the pink houses are a picnic compared to what they once were.
You're being rational here. I'm a psychologist, okay?
No, I'm saying it's irrational. The thing is, their response to all this is irrational.
Okay, so let me talk out the 2 sides of my mouth. But it is culturally rational. They have grown up with these messages about the inherent dangerousness, so they come in and they just assume that because I've been socialized to think it's dangerous, it must be dangerous. I mean, the Brooklyn DA spoke very painfully about this, where the example that stuck with me was an older black woman. She's going down the road. She stops to pick up her milk at the bodega, which is on the corner. And she comes out and she gets rushed by some plain cover cops who says, you've just been in a drug location. Where's the drugs? Where's the drugs? And she speaks to the indignity of it, the disrespect, and she ends it on a very chilling note. She says, I will never cooperate with the police. Now, if you know anything about communities, everybody knows your business. My neighbors can tell me what music I play, who visits me, what the postman has for me. I don't know these people. And there are people in the community who, they know what goes, they know who's stealing, they know who's doing what. And she says, I will never speak with the police. Because his point was, you've not alienated somebody vital to the community by telling them you don't respect their community. And I'm sure if you talk to these guys, they're in some ways decent people, but there's a way they have at looking at the community, which it's scary. It really, because I'm looking at these 4 cops on this video and I'm like, what the hell is, you reverse to arrest somebody who told you, who did a typical New York thing?
Yeah.
Watch out, I'm walking here, as the guy said, and it just, I can't get my head around it.
There
But
was
it's normal.
There was a terrible video that the Daily News obtained the other day and posted online, and it was on the front page. You may have seen it. It was about a police officer who shoots a dog. And there was a security camera in the hallway of this apartment building. It's not a big apartment building, so there's only a few apartments on each landing. And it's in the middle of the night, they've been called to a domestic dispute. So they come up the stairs, it's a walk up, come around, they come up and they're on this landing. There's 2 doors, cameras above you, and you can see that they are, and it's up like in the 180s in Manhattan. You can see that they're afraid. Every other motion, without anybody around them, is to the cop with his hand on the gun. He turns this way. There's nobody there. But when he says, I better look up the stairs, he puts his hand on the gun. I better look down the stairs. He puts his hand on the gun. They go to knock on the door. He puts his hand on the gun. And then when a neighbor opens the door, this dog comes out wagging its tail. The cop is terrified. The gun is halfway out when the dog comes out. And in the hallway, I mean, he killed the dog, but he could have killed anybody who was there. But the fear, forget about whether he was right to shoot the dog, whether the dog was dangerous or not. The fear that was just so evident. When I was a young reporter, we'd go everywhere. We'd go into the housing projects. That's what we did. I don't know why somebody would be so afraid to be in the place. It looked like a perfectly fine place. But there is fear.
I think that's a very interesting point, what you're saying, that the fear that police officers have. So, because I was trained in Europe as a police officer, so what I saw the difference here is the police training. Like here, the police academy takes about 9 months, like less than a year, you're a police officer. In Europe, it's 2 years until sometimes even 2.5. In Germany, it's almost 3 to 4 years. So there's a big difference in how the police are trained.
That's interesting.
So if you have, it's the same with any employment. If you have people that are not well trained, they are not prepared. And I feel a lot of police officers here are not prepared after
right.
9 months or 1 year to go out on the streets and do a good job. And the second thing that I also realized is the shooting training. Like in Europe, we learn to shoot into the arms or the legs. And here in New York, or just in general in the United States, is you shoot into the torso.
Right, you shoot to kill.
So, and that's another difference. I mean, in Europe, if you're not able to shoot from a certain distance into the arm or to the leg, you are not qualified to be a police officer. And shooting to the torso is much easier. So, and you obviously shoot to kill. And in Europe, you shoot to make sure the other person is not able to move anymore. So, and I think those are the two main differences that I can see, and why I believe that a lot of police officers are also scared, or as you mentioned, have
That's
fear.
very enlightening to me, and I'm glad you told me this.
I think my main question is, what do you want the audience to take away from your book? What's the takeaway from the book?
Buy it.
And let's say I buy it, I read it, and
No,
then what?
I wrote it before all of the controversy, right? So it wasn't written in with any of the controversy in mind, and so I like to think of it just as primarily as I hope, the story of a great man, and let people draw the lessons that they want about, what policing was like. And the other thing I would like people to know, and people have said this to me after reading the book, it's black and white people, but more white people. They had no idea, and I didn't, how unbelievably violently racist New York was. And the level of violence in New York, white on black violence, toward the start of the 20th century was off the charts. The other thing that I think is really interesting to see is how readily then police officers fired the guns at anything, anywhere. They just shot them. There's a story in the book, not far from here, there was a stockyards, and they had cattle in the stockyards. So one day, some bulls got loose, and steers, they ran through the streets of Manhattan. So now we have panic that there's some stampeding steers in Manhattan, by the Cardinal's house and in front of the hotels and stuff. So what do the police do? They decide they have to shoot them. And while they're shooting them, they're shooting New Yorkers. They're shooting a bellman of a hotel. They're shooting, and nothing happens to the police for doing it. It's accepted as, well, you're sure they had to kill it's too bad that, I'm sorry the guy died, but, you look at it like, oh my God.
Draw the line to what happened with the man 6 years ago who went into the Empire State Building, shot his boss, came out, was backed up by the police. The police
Yeah.
shot him, but I think
There are many different people,
five or six other
right,
people got shot.
right. Some of those circumstances are very difficult where you're in you're in a high crowded area. And that's a tough judgment call. Your high crowded area that somebody has been shooting guys, and like when does the cop fire? And that's hard. But they did it. They wounded civilians.
Hello.
This will be our last question unless somebody else has a pressing question.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Kenyatta Lasso, and I'm a student here. And well, thank you for coming. Hi. So I just have a main question because I know you mentioned about policing back then, and with the man that you did your biography on, he seems like a very a great person within the police department and also within the community. And I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts about, because you know about policing in the past and you see how kind of like history repeats about policing now. So I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts about policing in the future? Will it be better or will it be worse?
I think that it can only get better. I think that technology is going to help. I think that body cameras will help. I do think that when police officers are aware that, that things are being recorded, their actions are being recorded, they will, be more prone to think twice. And I also think that citizens who know that they're being recorded will be more prone to think twice about, how they interact with the police officers. And maybe they don't become as aggressive, and maybe the police don't become as aggressive. So I think that kind of thing is going to help. I think that technology also, and the police department is moving in this direction with very sophisticated crime mapping, very sophisticated real-time information for people. And so, everybody's photos around now, right? Everybody's got Facebook, so if there's a suspect, they can now get photographs of suspects pretty quickly and easily. And they've developed the capacity to distribute them almost instantaneously now by cell phone. And the cops have their own, cell phone apps now that have just come into existence. So there'll be bulletins, wanted person, and there's the picture. So you're not going to get a description of, black guy in dark sweatshirt and sneakers. And so that every black guy with dark sweatshirt and gets sneakers is suddenly a suspect in New York. So I think that can help. Attitudinally, I don't know. That's beyond me to figure out how to change, people's attitudes. There you go. One more, did you want to?
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Akima Forbes. I'm a student here at John Jay, and I walked past and I saw your book, and I saw a police officer, and yes, he really did look like a really good guy. But I feel like living here in New York, police officers it's like a culture. There's really a culture being racist towards Black people and minorities. Sometimes, because I don't know why, but I just feel like police officers are afraid. I don't know why they're afraid, because you're supposed to be, brave and strong and protect people. I don't really know why they're brave, but it depends on how you act towards police officers, because some police officers, you can get in trouble with them, and they'll be straightforward. They'll talk to you very nicely. And once you greet them in a certain way, even if they're wrong, once you greet them in a certain way, they're nice to you. But then sometimes you can be very nice and courteous to police officers. And as a Black woman, they look at me and just like, okay, like I'm the police, so whatever I say is right, and you can't do anything about it. So my thing is, I'm not really sure if the only way I think things would change is if people understand, like, that is to disintegrate that culture, that mind thinking, oh, I have to be afraid, they're different from me. I feel like, yes, police officers should have more training, and if they don't have, because like my friends have been to the police academy, they were only there for like 90 days.
Yeah.
And they graduate and they're out. And I always, think to myself, like, it's more to life than just, moving people around and making sure all the rules are not being broken. You really have to, have a thought process which won't get you in trouble and won't get other people in trouble. It's just like you want the law to be followed and you want everyone to have an understanding. But really, there's a culture in the police department, Black and white, man or female, that they just lose their sense of thought, and rules and regulations is just thrown out the window. And I just feel like it'll never change unless that culture of way of thinking is gone.
That's absolutely true. That's true.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. I don't want to, want to make sure something. Do you think I'm a police officer? Oh, I thought you did. I thought that, yeah. Okay, I didn't know whether you, no, okay.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for
No,
your
thank you. I enjoyed
illuminating
talking
work.
about it.
Okay, thanks a lot.